You are standing in a smoky field outside Athens in the year 500 BCE, and the smell alone would knock you sideways. Wood smoke, burnt fat, hot iron, animal blood, coppery and bright, soaking into dry summer dust. Men are shouting, a woman is singing, a bull is screaming, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, a butcher lifts a curved bronze knife that has been passed down through his family for 6 generations. He does not think of it as a crime. He does not think of it as blood sport. He thinks of it as a meal, a gift, a negotiation with the sky. Here is what almost no one tells you about ancient Greece. The gods of Olympus were not thin, distant spiritual abstractions. They were hungry. They had tastes. They had opinions about which cuts of meat you burned for them and which cuts you kept for yourself. And the entire economy of a Greek city, the politics, the calendar, even the rhythm of the year, was tuned to one single repeated act: sacrifice. The word in Greek is thysia. The smoke is the smell of the ancient world. You and I live in a world where religion is mostly a Sunday thing, a quiet hour, a private feeling. Your ancestors did not have that luxury. For them, the gods sat in a real building at the end of your street, and if you did not feed them properly, your harvest would fail, your ships would sink, your children would sicken without warning. The stakes were not philosophical. The stakes were bread. Survival. Tomorrow morning. So what did the ancient Greeks actually sacrifice to their gods? And is what you have heard about it. The shadowy illusions, the lurid myths, the hints of children on altars, even close to the truth. Stay with me, because the real answer is stranger, more practical, and way more unsettling than any textbook summary you read in school. The first thing they sacrificed, 99 times out of 100, was a domestic animal, a sheep, a goat, a cow, not exotic creatures, not firstborn sons. The animal had to be physically perfect, no broken horns, no blemishes in the coat, no missing teeth, no lameness. If a city wanted to honor Athena at her great festival, the Panathenea, the cost of a single bull could feed a family for an entire season. So imagine 100 of them at once, stretched across the altar in white smoke. That was a hecatomb. The word literally means 100 oxen. Homer drops it casually in the Iliad, around line 444 of Book 1. The Greeks, the poem says, bring up hecatomb after hecatomb to the god of fire. That single image, buried inside the opening of the Western canon, tells you the scale of what was happening across the Greek world. This was not occasional. This was industrial devotion. In some city-states, the budget for annual sacrifices was a serious line item in public spending. Inscribed stone records from Attica list sacred treasuries whose entire job was to keep the altars fed. But here is the part they never teach you in school. The Greeks were not burning their gods a steak dinner and walking away. They were sharing it. The word for this kind of offering, the most common kind, was not actually a burnt sacrifice in the modern sense. It was a thysia, and it was a barbecue. Picture this. A family walks up to the altar at dawn. They have carried a young sheep on a wooden cart through the city streets. A flute player leads them. The priest sprinkles barley and clean water on the altar and on the animal. With one quick cut, the throat is opened. The blood is caught in a bowl and splashed against the altar stone so the gods could drink it. Then the butchering begins. The thigh bones are wrapped in shimmering white fat, twice layered, the way Hesiod describes it in his Theogony, written down around 700 BCE. That bundle is set on the fire. It is the god's portion. Everything else, the meat, the organs, the rest of the fat, the hide, is roasted on spits, divided up according to strict rules, and eaten by the worshippers right there, in the shadow of the temple, before sunset. This is critical. Sacrifice was not destruction. It was communion. A god got the smoke. A family got dinner. The community got a public meal. And the priests, who had to stay ritually pure, often walked away with a fixed share. If you were a poor Athenian citizen, the religious calendar was one of the few times you were guaranteed a real piece of cooked meat in your life. Scholars have traced this in the inscribed ledgers of the Athenian Acropolis, line after line of earmarked cattle for named festivals. So why do most people think of Greek sacrifice as something grim and shadowy? Because the myths tell a different story. The second thing you have to understand is that the Greeks themselves liked to say the gods were cheated, and they wrote it down so you would never forget. Hesiod, the same poet who gave us the gods' birth order, also told the story of Prometheus. Prometheus was carving up a great ox at a feast on Olympus. To trick Zeus, he put the edible meat deep inside the bull's stomach, hidden in folds of glistening innards. On top he stacked only the bare bones, dressed beautifully in shining fat. Zeus, Hesiod writes, chose the beautiful heap. From that day forward, the story goes, humans kept the meat, and the gods got the bones. This myth is a confession. The Greeks knew they had worked a scam. They knew their gods were getting a bad deal. The whole system was a polite, ancient agreement. The gods keep the smoke and the symbolic bones, the people keep the steak, but the third layer is where it gets dark, because myths sometimes leak real history. And the famous case at Mount Lycaon in Arcadia has been shaking archaeologists for almost 20 years. There, on the high altar of Zeus in the mountains, an American Greek team led by David Gilman Romano of the University of Arizona has been digging since 2007. What they have found under the layers of ash is a continuous record of ritual sacrifice going back to at least the early Bronze Age, around 3200 to 100 BCE. Previous excavations of the Greek Archaeological Service in the early 20th century had pegged the altar to about 700 BCE. The new dates pushed it back by 3 whole millennia. In 2016, the Penn Museum and Romano's team announced something even stranger. In one of the ash layers, mixed with animal bones burning the way they should, the team found a single human bone. Then more from the same context. The samples were radiocarbon dated, and the results published in a peer-reviewed paper. Reread that sentence. The team did not say human sacrifice was normal here. What they said was, the new data are consistent with the literary tradition that associated Mount Lycaon with disturbing ritual. In other words, archaeology met the story of King Lycaon, who supposedly sacrificed a child on this exact mountain to test whether Zeus was really a god. And then there is a Nemespilia on Crete, the other great case file. In the summer of 1979, the Greek archaeologist Yannis Sakalarakis was excavating a Minoan temple when he reached the floor of one collapsed chamber. A young man, bound, lay on a low wooden platform. Behind him, a second figure held a bronze knife. A third figure held a jug, caught mid-escape. The whole chamber had been destroyed by an earthquake around 1700 BCE that crushed everyone inside before they could finish the act. National Geographic published the photograph in February 1981. Scholars have argued about it ever since. Some say it is proof of ritual murder. Some say it is a burial misinterpreted. The debate has not closed in almost half a century. So the fourth thing the Greeks did, the rare and terrifying thing, was put humans on the altar, not as a rule. As a story the Greeks told about themselves. The scapegoat ritual of the Thargelia festival in Athens, every May or June, chose one ugly man and one ugly woman from the edges of the city. Usually a criminal, a refugee, the disfigured, the broken, fed them, paraded them, beat them with sticks, and drove them across the border. They were called pharmakoi, which is literally where the modern word pharmacy comes from. A living polluted object, sacrificed not to a god of the sky, but to the city's own hunger for clean air. And sometimes the substitute was an animal too small to argue with. At Eleusis, just outside Athens, the great sanctuary of Demeter built its entire mystery cult around the piglet. Pig bones from the Mycenaean era, around 400 BCE, have been recovered burnt in the drains of Megaron B, right in front of the altar. A pig was the people. A pig was cheap. A pig was something a poor farmer could carry up the hill in one hand. Now here is the twist that keeps this whole story alive even today. Experts still disagree loudly. Some, like the historian Dennis Hughes, author of the 1991 Routledge study Human Sacrifice in Ancient Greece, say the literary sources preserve a memory of real occasional ritual killings that faded out as the classical polis grew more sophisticated. Others argue the so-called evidence of Greek human sacrifice was largely invented or projected backward onto the Bronze Age by later Greeks, a kind of confession of ancient wrongness to make classical civilization look cleaner. Mount Lycaon sits exactly between those two views. The ash says maybe yes. The myth says definitely yes. The bones might say once, which means the real story of Greek sacrifice is not the gods getting slaughtered humans. It is a much weirder, more human deal. It is a community that invented ritual meat-eating to feed itself and told itself terrifying origin stories to justify the bargain. Smoke up to the heavens, dinner at the table. The gods get the bones wrapped in beautiful fat every single time, and the people get to live. Look around your kitchen tonight. If you have a feast, a roast, a special dinner, you are doing something the Greeks would immediately recognize. You are setting aside the best portion. You are sharing the meal. You are marking the moment as different from a normal weeknight. Your ancestors stood on dusty stone at 6 in the morning with a bronze knife in one hand and a flute song in their ears, doing the same thing, terrified the gods would notice if they got the proportions even slightly wrong. They were not monsters. They were people trying to bargain with the sky. The bargain was ugly. It worked. And somehow, after 3,000 years, the bones wrapped in shining fat are still the part that climbs to heaven. If this broke something in how you saw the ancient Greeks, stick around. Next week, we are going to walk straight into the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most secret ritual in the ancient Mediterranean. And the only reason we know what happened inside is 7 initiates who could not stop talking about it. See you then. Drop a comment with the strangest sacrifice from any culture you have ever heard about. And if you have not yet, hit subscribe. We are just getting started.